Enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussion. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and engaging conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Ben Eisbart, who I refer to as a community advocate extraordinaire.
Well, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So first, I want to get a little sense of your background and really how you sort of got to basically, let's start with you just telling me a little bit about your background and your professional life.
Sure. I was born in Connecticut, Derby, Connecticut, which is known as the home of Commodore Isaac Hull, who was the commander of Old Ironsides. That's its claim to fame. Went to school back east and then went into the Army during the Vietnam era. As I got out of the Army, I looked for an opportunity to self-actualize and, frankly, earn a lot of money. So I became a stockbroker, was on Wall Street and in New Haven, Connecticut. During that time, I had an opportunity to explore not-for-profit organizations in New Haven, so I was pretty active in the JCCs at the time, Junior Chamber of Commerce, and a number of Jewish organizations, Family and Children's Service, the Temple, things of that nature. Then I was fortunate enough to go on what was called at the time, I still think they have that title, Young Leadership Mission, to Israel. I spent time there, and I got very turned on, thinking to myself, maybe my avocation, volunteering, might make sense to be my vocation. One thing led to another, and Fort Wayne, Indiana had an opening. Didn't know where Fort Wayne was other than Indiana had the Indy 500. So my wife and I drove out. She was 8.5 months pregnant with our first child. And we found Fort Wayne a warm and welcoming community. Lovely place to raise a family, you know, all the good stuff. So I was the Federation director from 1972 to 1980. In 1979, I was approached by the then challenger for the mayoralty position, Win Moses, to run for the 4th District, which is the Wildwood Park Southwest area. It's changed now because of annexation. And so I never gave much thought to politics, but I thought this would be a cool idea. So I ran for office, got elected, got reelected, and had an opportunity to leave the not-for-profit world and got involved in the scrap business. Superior Iron and Metal, which became OmniSource, was a place where I spent a lovely time and great opportunities to self-actualize. It was a growth point in my life. But then I decided I wanted to try to buy a business. And the Rifkin family wouldn't sell me OmniSource, not that I could afford it, but I went to a heavy-duty laundry equipment company called L&S. L&S was an old-time supplier of dry cleaning goods and washing machines and all that stuff. Our claim to fame is we had the laundry tunnel that washed all of the laundry for Notre Dame. It was a pretty cool operation, huge, whatever. Came time to buy the company. The owner decided he wanted to stay on a little longer. So I decided 2 of us couldn't run the company, and I left and started with an individual I know, Errol Hauk, the Eisbart Group, or Errol Hauk Associates, executive recruiting, headhunting, things. Did that for several years until it got tiresome. We were traveling all the time on planes, interviewing people in restaurants, all this stuff. But I had done some recruiting for Leonard Rifkin for the now larger OmniSource, and one day he called and said, how about coming back? Your fees are too high. I could pay you less, but get some great work out of you. And at that time, I thought this made a lot of sense. So I rejoined OmniSource, was an executive vice president there, and stayed with OmniSource until Steel Dynamics acquired the company. And then Keith Bussey, a principal of Steel Dynamics, gave me a call one day. I was still at OmniSource, and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm here working. He said, what about lunch? I said, I normally don't eat lunch. He said, well, you mind if I bring a bag lunch? No, come on over. You own the company anyway. What the hell? So we had lunch, and he said, tell me what you do. So I told him I have compliance, and I had benefits, and I have the HR platform. He said, we don't have HR. I said, you don't have HR? No, we don't have HR. I said, do you have people? Yeah. Do you have HR? No, we don't have HR. Okay, you don't have HR. Well, one thing led to another, and he made me an offer, as they say, I couldn't refuse. And so I became vice president of Steel Dynamics in the human resources and corporate compliance area. Stayed there until I retired 5 years ago. Great ride, great company, great people. It's been a good journey.
And you use the term a lot, self-actualize. I'm curious to know how you define that and what that means to you.
Well, I would define it as taking the potential that has been given to you and maximizing it to the fullest in an environment that encourages that. And I think that's my definition of it.
And then, and obviously, since you have retired, you really haven't retired. You've just changed the, I think maybe where you get your not paycheck, but your list of being involved in boards, commissions, organizations is very, very long. So before we get into like the specifics of that, I'm really curious to know, what do you think makes a good leader?
I think the ability to listen is incredibly important. The willingness to get out in front of an issue and develop a team to achieve based on the goals, the objectives of the organization. Willingness to do the hard work. It's not all pomp and circumstance. It's sometimes licking envelopes at 12 o'clock at night. That's my high-level definition of what leadership is about, motivating people to be better than they think they can be.
And how do you also interpret that? Because, you know, even like when you were on the Fort Wayne City Council, you were president twice, and when you are on committees and boards, I mean, there's a lot of personalities and people, and you have to build consensus. And what are the skills and things? How do you adapt leadership, or what do you think you use from those skills in those types of environments?
I try to do, my wife says I should do more of it, active listening. Not enter into the fray, but try to get a sense of where the conversation is going. I like to be a consensus builder, because I think if not, then they're polar opposites and you don't get anywhere fast. So I try to get a sense of what the desire and the direction, excuse me, is of those that are around the table, excuse me, and then come to a conclusion that may not satisfy and will not satisfy this side 100% and this side 100%. And if you achieve that, you know you probably got the thing pretty well nailed, because both sides have some of what they want, but not all of what they want to the expense of the other.
And how important do you think when you have a group and you're trying to build consensus, this idea of not working towards like this, like changing other people's minds, like, you know, just trying to actively listen and understand? Because I think partly why we're so polarized as a country right now is because, one, we're not listening, but two, everybody's trying to change, you know, other people instead of understanding. So I'm wondering what you think, though, when you have those sort of thoughts about the idea of bringing people together, and, you know, is it about changing people's minds, or, you know, and what your thoughts about why we are so polarized as a country?
Well, I think there are several questions there. In my schooling, I was fortunate enough to achieve a master's degree in counseling. One of my favorite counselors was a guy by the name of Dr. Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers had active listening as his mantra. And basically what it is repeating back to the individual with whom you're communicating what he or she has said, and remaining silent. And I find if you act as a sounding board as opposed to a judgmental individual, you can get people to work themselves through. Now, that's good, I think, on social issues that aren't highly political. The political scene today is something I don't think any of us has ever experienced. So I don't see how active listening might affect that to the same conclusion. But we are a polarized, it's interesting, on a national basis we're polarized, but here I happen to be one of probably 3 Democrats in Allen County. So I interface a lot with my Republican friends. And it's not a mud food fight slinging issue here. We have real substantive conversations about things that we hope will make the community better. So because I have a D on my shoulder and someone has an R on my shoulder, I shouldn't talk to the individual? No, you be civil, human. I think on the grassroots level, democracy is still working. When it iterates up, the farther up you get, the farther away you are from rationalization.
And so let's talk a little bit about the idea of community involvement, and why, you know, you said that when you started out, you know, you sort of thought you had an interest in nonprofit and pursued that. Why do you think being involved in your community is important?
Well, I had as a role model when I was growing up my mother. My mother was very active in PTA, in a Jewish organization called Hadassah, a women's organization. She was always willing to roll up her sleeves and chair the Mother Goose Fair for the Lincoln School PTA. And my father was quite involved in our synagogue, where the maxim, do not separate yourself from your community, was a byword. So I saw that those were role models that I thought I could replicate in some degree. And wherever we've been, I've gotten up and rolled up my sleeves and tried to make a difference.
And you said that you were one of 3 Democrats in Allen County, and you're probably one of about 400 Jews in Allen County. So how do you use those? Did you find like those differences, or maybe that some people maybe wouldn't have found you inviting you to the table? How did you feel and use, you know, navigate those kinds of waters?
Well, I'm sure there's some people that don't want to talk to me. There's some people I don't want to talk to. So what the heck? If my Jewish heritage is an issue, wouldn't be surprising because anti-Semitism is still alive and well, and unfortunately, in light of our polarized society, getting worse. Incidents are occurring. But I set that aside. Most people are people of goodwill. There's some jerks out there too, but if you focus on the jerks, you become a jerk yourself.
And What do you think about, what is your advice to people who are young people who think about wanting to get involved in their community and join boards and commissions? What are your suggestions and how to make the inroads, and how do you start and what to look for?
I think you have to define what your passion is and what you want to affect through your work and your energy and your time and your talent. And then volunteer. Volunteer. When I was a stockbroker in New Haven, Connecticut, I was part of a Republican group that ran someone from Yale as a candidate for the mayoralty position. And so I took a leave of absence from my brokerage career and worked in the administrator, ran the back office of this campaign. And that got me involved in politics. And when I came here, as I mentioned, I was asked by Winfield, former mayor, to consider running for the 4th District. But I've licked my envelopes, knocked on doors, posted yard signs, and got thrown off some steps because I was of the wrong party, of the people whom I was knocking on the door.
And you talk about finding out your passion, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. And these are just some that you currently or have recently served on. And not only do you just serve on the boards, but you take a leadership position as a chairman and president. So it includes Greater Fort Wayne Inc., Arts United, the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, the Allen County Fort Wayne Capital Improvement, the Allen County Public Library, Neighborhood Health, the Downtown North River Task Force, the Fort Wayne Philharmonic, the Fort Wayne Community School Board, the Fort Wayne Plan Commission, the Fort Wayne Redevelopment Commission, the Metropolitan Human Relations Commission, the Allen County Democratic Party, you were the city chairman, Allen County Economic Opportunity Council, Enterprise Zone for Fort Wayne, Indiana Office of Utility Consumer Counselor Advisory Council, and the Fort Wayne Civic Theater. So, first of all, how do you, and obviously you're not doing all of these now,
right.
But what is the passion, and how and why? Do people just say, okay, we need a board, we're going to bid?
Well, you missed one too,
sorry.
which I'm very proud of. Governor Holcomb appointed me to be part of the Judicial Nominating Committee for the Superior Court of Allen County, and that was quite nice.
Right, because you were involved with the appointment of Laurie Morgan, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and several other good people. These were done through 20-some, 30-some years of engagement. I mean, we came in 49 years ago.
Right.
So if I did one a year, I'd have 49 organizations.
Okay, but you're known not to just do one a year.
Well, I like to be stimulated. And I was fortunate enough in the businesses that I was involved in that a sense of community was part of our obligation. Get involved. Steel Dynamics is involved in a million things, making the communities in which we function so much better. OmniSource, the same thing. So I found that I gravitated toward areas that I liked to try to make better, or at least learn from. And as luck would have it, I had a chance to chair several of these organizations. Sometimes for the good, sometimes people said, why the hell is he chairing it? But it gets back to my fundamental understanding of what it is to be an individual that is part of a community and how to make that community a bit better. Not presumptuous, not a master sculptor, but maybe a chip here, a chip there, making it better.
So is that your idea of how people should think about getting involved in their community? Is about doing this little chipping away, or?
Well, I think after you achieve Maslow's needs, food, shelter, all that type of stuff, and you have the time, I find I get more than I give from involvement. I've met a whole host of wonderful people, and it gave me a sense of purpose. So I would encourage people to do that. Find something where your passion is and roll up your sleeves and get involved.
And with all your involvement in various aspects of Fort Wayne and being here almost 50 years, how have you seen Fort Wayne change and evolve for the good and maybe the not so good?
Well, when we came here in '72, the community was much smaller. It was somewhat insulated from the outside world in several ways. Through the various iterations of political leadership and luck and all, we have blossomed now to be a benchmark of what it is to be a dynamic city in the United States. A lot of people deserve credit for it, whether you're Republican or Democrat. They believed the myth that we could be better, and we became the myth that we are better. So it's been quite a renaissance. I mean, you just walk down to Promenade Park, you look at our rivers. The rivers that I experienced when I was on the city council flooded in the 70s. I remember President Reagan in my district in his suit handing a sandbag to somebody. He didn't get too dirty. Wondered how he could continue to do that, but that was another story. But now the rivers are turning into real fun, recreational, beautiful, although they'll still be silty because of the nature of the bed. But a lot has been achieved by a number of good people willing to do stuff.
Do you think that's the critical element, is the people willing, I mean, good people willing that have, maybe that they put forth, they set aside their own egos for the betterment? Do you think that's the critical ingredient?
For sure, absolutely.
And let's talk about the Judicial Nominating Committee and why that is so important, especially with this idea, with Laurie Morgan. Can you talk about what that means and why people really need to understand the importance for the nominating of judges or voting for judges, and why this really matters?
Well, we're a nation of laws, and they are administrated by judges. And so we need the best and the brightest to be that facilitator to maintain a democracy. The Judicial Nominating Committee gets involved when a judge has retired mid-term. Excuse me, our judges run for office, but if a judge retires mid-term, then a selection must be made to replace that individual. And the opportunity to put your name in the hat is voluntary. So lawyers or magistrates, some with background, some with not, throw their hat in the ring. And we have a judge from the state Supreme Court is our facilitator, and then we have 6 of us, so we have a total of 7, that interviews any individual that fits the qualifications. I mean, you have to be a lawyer, or a lawyer that has taken a position of magistrate, and so we've interviewed hosts of individuals, and then the way the statute is set up, we then select 3 to send to the governor's office, and he, in this case, then interviews, does the background and whatever, and makes the final selection.
And I know you can't go into the specifics of it, but because of where we are and looking at really wanting to make sure diversity and inclusivity, and the talk about having a superior justice like Laurie Morgan, who's African American, was there thought about that, or was it really that you looked at the best candidates and didn't, that wasn't something that was brought up?
You keep mentioning Laurie. Laurie earned the opportunity to be part of the three. Her interview was outstanding, as were the others that we sent down. Justice is blind. Now, I understand diversity, inclusion, all that other stuff, but in this case, she earned the opportunity to have her name sent to Governor Holcomb. And he saw within the three, she rose to the top and made that choice. So there weren't points given. This was not an affirmative action selection committee, although I understand the theory behind affirmative action. It wasn't a quota. I mean, if she had, and in fact, she had applied for a previous judgeship and was not selected to go further. But this time, she hit it out of the park and deserved to have her name sent to Indianapolis.
And you've been on boards and chairing boards, like when the board has to look for a new executive director for the organization. And one that comes to mind is the public library system. I'm curious, as you thought about how libraries were changing for the 21st century and what we needed libraries to be, when you thought about looking for the new executive director, Susan Bayer for the Allen County Public Libraries, what were the things that you thought would be important both from a leadership standpoint, but the other skills that you felt were important for taking our public library system and recognizing where it needs to go and what it needs to be for the 21st century?
Well, having been in the search business, I was familiar with the process, at least the process that we use to find CEOs, CFOs, various leaders in organizations and all. What we did was to look at, I chaired the search committee for Susan, who's a super person, home run. And the community is going to benefit from her presence here. We looked at the hard, cold facts. Must have an MLS, must have so many years of this, the administrative whatever, figure out where a book is shelved, all those hard stuff. The hard stuff is easy. You either have an MLS or you Master in Library Science, or you don't. It's the soft stuff that is the differential. The soft stuff is the EQ, the emotional quotient. And we engaged a search firm that, we interviewed 3 search firms, found one that distinguished itself from the other 2, and then sat down via Zoom, because all of this was done in the midst of COVID, where we still are, but that's another story, and drew up a list of the musts and the wants. There's a philosophy that I subscribe to, that the library is the people's palace. It's a place where anyone can go to try to better himself or herself, to learn some more, to get some tutelage in specific areas, to experience the wonder of books and other methods of transmitting knowledge, things of that nature. We interviewed, I think I recall, at least on paper, 50 candidates, 45, 50 candidates, narrowed it down to a point where we had 9 that then were shrunk to 3. The 3 were interviewed, and the selection was made, and re-interviewed Susan. If you know Susan,
I haven't. She's going to be. I'm going to interview her in a couple months.
Well, you'll find her to be a dynamo. She recognizes that the library is supported by patrons. Patrons are anyone that's a taxpayer. It's not. I had a little challenge in nomenclature in the past where the patrons were called customers. Well, they're not customers. Customers buy things. These are people who provide the opportunity for us to have one of the best libraries in the country, through their tax dollars and their involvement. That in of itself is a major change, I think, because you appreciate the fact that they're but for you would not be in existence. And she's rolled up her sleeves. She's been in more places in 6 months than I think I've been in 6 years. All for the good, all for the good. And the staff seems to be resonating with good accolades. And she inherited the position, or received the position in the midst of COVID, where we were not allowing people in the library. We had curbside service, and the electronic media was fine, but you couldn't come in and get a book. And we had staff working from home, many of them. So she's been exposed to a test of fire here. I can't wait to see, once COVID's behind us, let's hope soon, how we're going to self-actualize even more. And it's a tribute to the search firm. It's a tribute to the Board of Trustees for recognizing Susan from amidst the 40 or some that we interviewed or reviewed. It's been a great find. She's been a great find.
And because you have insight and experience in search, because I feel like now Fort Wayne is really in a period of flux in leadership. When you look at so many of the organizations, from the NIC to SEED to the Northeast Indiana Regional Partnership, I mean, we're really in a stage of where a lot of people that took the organizations to certain levels, you know, the CEOs or executives are retiring or leaving. And so as we look to bring in the next round, what do you think are some of those critical things that would make someone successful for Fort Wayne, given that they would have, you know, all the necessary, like, resume? But what do you think it is that we need to think about when selecting these types of leaders? Because, you know, part of it is, my question also is that the pros and cons of having to go outside, you know, to find these leaders, as opposed to building from within.
And I think that's a good point. Sometimes you don't have to go outside, but you ought to compare the inside candidates with those that are outside and weigh and measure, does familiarity add value, assuming the hard facts are there, the X number of years experience, the ability, you know, all that good stuff. Or does it require, because no one is in a succession pattern that fits and that's one thing I found organizations that I used to do executive recruiting for. If one of the first things we needed to do was to define what the musts and the wants are, and test ourselves, is this exactly what we need or we want? But when the Kents come in, you don't want to start changing it. Okay, this could be, they're not exactly whatever. I mean, once you start, then you end up getting a camel instead of building a horse, making a horse. I think the community is going through an evolution. You look at the young folks coming in, the downtown vibrancy, things that 10 years ago would have been on a whiteboard as aspirations. Not that we've achieved all, but the individual that is selected has to embody, I think, the spirit of the organization that he or she will lead, and at the same time have appreciation for the past, because you wouldn't be where you are without the path of history leading you there. So it's a combination. And after all is said and done, luck is involved in it, because you're trying to predict human behavior. The best predictor, barring any physical or mental issue, is past behavior. So that adds stuff, but even stuff with great individuals with great resumes, once they come through the door, can turn into someone that might be Dr. Jekyll instead of Mr. Hyde, or whichever one it was.
Well, and I also think that there's the issue, though. I think there are some nuances to a community that you have to sort of either be able to see or fit into, because a lot of times when you bring people from another city or a community, you know, a lot of them, sometimes they're going to be bull in a china shop in certain organizations, and change is hard. I mean, so, and also I think so sometimes you have to think, how are they going to fit into the community itself? Or because if you think about the amount of time and what it takes to find somebody, I mean, how long for the library search committee, how long was the process from the time you started to?
I would say it took 4 or 5 months, and then Susan had to give her notice and did what we hope made a transformation.
Right.
Slick, not, hey, I just got a job in Fort Wayne, I'll see you, goodbye. She was sensitive enough, as the right candidates should be and are, to a peaceful transition, so the organization she left was in good shape. And also, it's 6 months or so.
So figure let's say 6, 7 months, plus not only the search and that energy, but you also have sort of the downtime in the organization and who's overseeing it, right? So you want to make sure that you find someone who's going to stick, right? Because
for sure,
you don't want someone who's just going to come in and then 6 months later you got to find somebody. So when you think about, given that anyone would have whatever qualifications they need on paper for whatever job, but when you think about what are those intangibles or special kinds of characteristics that somebody needs to have in order to be successful in Fort Wayne, what would you say some of those are?
Well, I think you have to have an appreciation for the community itself. When I came here from the East Coast, there's the expression, a New York minute. Well, I was, first of all, I was a hell of a lot younger, but I was moving a pretty fast pace here, and someone pulled me aside and say, Ben, this is not the East Coast. So I said, oh, okay, so the Maumee is not the Hudson River. I got that mixed up. So I had to repurpose myself and slow things down, because things did not move as quickly here as they did back in New York, New Haven, Connecticut. So you have to have an appreciation for the culture, the timing, the leadership. There are those that are bemoaning the fact we don't have new, young, fresh leaders, but when some new, young, fresh leaders tries to take the mantle of leadership, it's like, get away, kid, I'm still here. So you have to navigate so you don't find yourself on the shoals of a rocky shore here. And also be willing to make mistakes and admit the mistakes that have been made. No one is perfect at all. And then it depends on the organization or the business that you're recruiting for. Some espouse change is a byword, but in reality, they want to change it their way, not what is best for the organization or the community in which it functions. So there's a lot, and again, luck does play some to it, but the best indicator of luck, I find, is hard work and analysis, and gut instinct is, I think, an overused term, because some people, gut instinct is awful.
Right. Well, they say luck is when opportunity and preparation meet, in a sense.
Right.
But I want to go back to this point you made about the younger leaders coming up and people sort of not giving them the chance. Or, I mean, when you look at all of the organizations that you've been on the board or are involved with, how do you think we are at building our bench? And really, because of the fact, like, is it good or bad that for certain, all these positions that we don't have, I mean, we have to look outside, we're doing national searches. Is that an indication that we aren't doing what we should, which is building our own team?
I think it's a good observation. Succession planning is a phrase that is overused and under-facilitated. One of the things we did at Steel Dynamics was to create a program where we were grooming younger employees to move up the ladder, providing them with the history, the background, the skill set, so that when Charlie, who's running Plant A, got a job from a competitor, although we didn't lose too many to competitors, there was a level that we could choose from to replace Charlie or Susie or whatever. But I think businesses and organizations, considering everything else they need to do to continue the work they're doing, shortchange themselves by not considering what happens if the bus hits Executive Director A or President B. And just to go out of town for a candidate to take the job shouldn't be the mantra of any succession plan. I mean, a good company prepares itself to replace itself. Look at Chuck Surak, Sweetwater. I mean, he's leaving. I think he almost left.
Yeah, he's leaving next week. Yeah, end of August.
Next week, and John is taking over. And John has been working with Chuck for a gazillion years, and it'll be a peaceful transition. Look at Jeff Bezos and his iteration, or they build in with the vision they had that allowed them to be as successful as they are, a critical component that if you get hit by a bus, there's someone that can pick you up, put you off to the side, and drive the bus forward.
But I think that's also much better in the for-profit world than the nonprofit, because one of the things I want to look at is really the boards of nonprofits, because when you look at, and you sort of look at the boards in Fort Wayne for lots of organizations and things, it's the same names. I mean, a lot of times. And there is this perception that, wrong or right, both in the business world and nonprofit in Fort Wayne, that it's a lot of white, middle-aged plus men who are holding these positions on the boards, on these commissions, on these organizations, and that it's still this old boys network and club, and that people, women and minority can't get the seat at the table. Or so. Do you agree with that? Do you think that we are? Is it? And in some cases, I think that what you see is there's the generation now of the people like yourself, who I call these community advocates extraordinaire, and there's nobody coming behind them to take these roles. And I don't know I don't know what it is. Like, is it that you don't have someone that you're mentoring to sort of take that on, or is it that there still is this very fear of wanting the old boys club, to expand it? Because when you look at organizations and you look at executive committees and boards, it's not a lot of diversity, and it's a lot of the same names. And so I'm just curious how you see that, and what could we do better?
Well, I think your observations are to a great extent valid. Good old boys and good old girls network, good old women network. I think YLNI has made an impact. Leadership Fort Wayne has made an impact. But I would agree with you that it's still somewhat of an insular society, the boards that I've been on or that I've seen. Now, that doesn't mean boards haven't tried. I chaired the governance committee of a couple of organizations, and we put together a matrix of what are the skill sets necessary to serve on the board that we're missing, and filled it out hither and yon. What we found was, and maybe to our dismay, that the same people have been asked to serve on on a number of boards, and one of the things you don't want to do is to stretch someone so thin that they fail in everything, or to have a board member who doesn't show up. I think we have to make it easier to serve on boards. Boards sometimes operate during the day, and depending on what your job is and all, you may not be able to get away. So maybe evening meetings, but evening meetings then conflict with young families. So I don't think there's a single answer, but a sensitivity to the fact that we need to branch out using this matrix to find the skill sets and the qualities necessary, and then continue to ask.
But do you think, even though you have the matrix and what the skills and qualities are, do you think that one of the biggest drivers, especially on nonprofit boards, it has to relate it to do with fundraising?
Yeah, fundraising is not fun.
Right, but I think that also limits a lot for young people or for people who don't have the connections in the community that they could call up and get people to write a check for, or they don't have it themselves. So I just wonder if, when you talk about all the skills in matrix, that people have skills and talents, but are we still putting that through the lens of where's the fundraising capabilities?
Well, I think it would be naive to think that that isn't a component somewhere in the category of here's a new board member. But one of the things we've found in several organizations that I've been affiliated with is to ask individuals not to be a board member, but to serve on committees. For example, AWS Foundation. We have people that are on the grant committee that aren't board members. But if they demonstrate the interest, the sensitivity, the caring, the hard work, whatever, then we would move them to the board role. Now, AWS is not an organization that raises funds. We give away funds. So that's probably a bad example to your question.
But it's a part of a bigger example, which is people don't know, like, that how do they find to serve on committees? Or, like, I traditionally, for several reasons, don't like to join boards, but partly it's because I always thought that there was an expectation if you sit on a board that either you have to give a certain amount of money or you have to have the ability to raise a certain amount of money. Well, and that's just not, where I am comfortable with. But I think this idea, but people don't know, like, how to get involved in a committee, or that there are these committees, or, they think that, and then of course, if you're a board member and you're in charge of a committee, who do you reach out to join that committee? People you know. So how do we do better at getting more in the mix or creating a better recipe?
I think we're moving in that direction. The trifecta, time, treasure, and talent. So if you have the time or the treasure, the skill set, then you're not looking to bring somebody on board that can write a check. There are gradated expectations. I don't disagree with you that the old way was you could become a leader if you write a big check, even if you're a jerk, because as long as the check cashes,
as long as the check cleared,
as long as it clears, you're our person.
Right.
Right. I would be naive to say that has not gone away, but I think it is migrating more so into someone that is willing to roll up the sleeves and bake the bread, lick the envelopes, come up with creative ideas. That has as much value in many cases as the individual could write a check and never show up at a board meeting.
And do you think that your contemporaries, because like it or not, a lot of the men that I'm referring to who sit on boards and commissions are your contemporaries, do you think that they have the flexibility in their thinking or willingness to sometimes even step aside or come alongside, or how they look for other people? Do you think that they're they're moving, like, are we going to have to push them to this, or are they going to move into this kind of thinking willingly?
Well, interesting, the boards that I've been on, the appointed boards are ones that an outside entity makes the appointments. So those are different. The voluntary boards, it's a combination. I mean, you have people that have had 15 years board service in the same organization. Well, it's time to go to pasture, or at least take a break. One of the things that AWS did, I was fortunate enough to be the founding chair of the foundation, and served the three-year terms and then rolled off because that was the maximum time one can serve. And then one of the things that AWS put in place was, since you've served your three-year terms, you had to take a year off, and then you were eligible, if you wish, for a legacy term of just one 3-year term. So that caused some of the old folks in the old board to serve their time, leave, come back, and go on forever.
Or maybe you could also do it that during either where they have to serve, where they can take that break or something, or they come back, maybe that's when they become a mentor, like either to someone in the community or someone from a committee, because I think also there needs to be, you sort of need to learn the nuances, like if you're being on a board, and because there is a lot of politics and bureaucracy. I mean, it's by nature.
It's human nature.
So I think that to help foster the next generation, and also part of the challenges is that millennials, they don't want to be part of any organized.
Well,
They don't join groups. They don't want to be part of service organizations.
Which is a big challenge.
They don't want to. They don't want to give money. They want to give money directly to smaller entities, the grassroots efforts. So I'm wondering, as someone who has truly been really enmeshed not only in search and HR, but in the nonprofit service of the community, especially here, what are your thoughts about that in the future?
I hope the next generation that follows the millennials and the generation Z or X, Z, takes a combined approach, looking at how we got to where we are versus those that, and I'm not saying this as an overall generalization, those that look for their own self-interest, and combine the two and say, I have an obligation or a need to satisfy something in me and the community I've chosen in which to live, to volunteer. It's tough.
Right. And so you also have a passion that does not allow you to fulfill it by being on any board or service, which is to cook. And I understand that you have a very large, extensive collection of cookbooks. Is that not true?
That is true. You've done your research.
So I am very curious. What is your favorite dish to make?
I like to, we don't use a lot of meat because we stay away from red meat for health reasons, and just we don't care for it. Zarzuzela is a South American fish stew that I love to cook. It's a tomato base, and it has mussels, and it has clams, and it has a solid whitefish and all that. That's my go-to dish if I'm looking to cook.
And what is your go-to dish if you need to have some people over from your board, or you need to get them to sort of
my go-to dish
sway them to your side?
My go-to dish there is to call Tony Ficcaro and ask him to cater.
And where's Tony Ficcaro? What is he?
Figaro's.
The Figaro's?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's good to know. At the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor.
I had to read Remembrance of Things Past because I was an English major.
Right.
Hated them.
Okay. Well, hopefully you'll like these. This is a parlor game, so hopefully it'll be a little bit more fun.
Okay, go ahead.
What is your favorite word?
Oh, I don't have one, but what's flashed in front of my mind was organization, but maybe that's because we were talking about it.
What is your least favorite word?
I.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Activities where I find my curiosity satisfied.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Fools.
What sound or noise do you love?
Violin.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Car horns.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Doctor.
What profession would you not like to do?
Manual labor.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My family, the boys.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Oh, a lot of people. I think my grandfather.
How would you like to die?
Peacefully and quiet with not a lot of fanfare.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome aboard. We have an opening in Section C to be a treasurer of ABC Foundation.
Well, I want to thank Ben Eisbart, the community advocate extraordinaire, for having a seat at our table. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been very interesting.
And to learn more about And Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had, go to andgoodcompany.info. And we look forward to next week when we can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.